One of the very pressing topics of our time is the idea of poverty in America and how we address this poverty. Certainly, we have tried for many years. We go back, of course, to the famous war on poverty under President Johnson to trying to attack poverty. We go back even further to the New Deal. We go back to policies in the progressive era at the turn of the 20th century. Uh, there's always been this desire to eliminate poverty in America, and many will say, as the richest country in the world, how is it possible that so much poverty can exist in this country? Many will consider it a scandal, and certainly it becomes a moral imperative for us as Catholics, for us as Christians, for us as human beings, to do everything we can to try to eliminate poverty. There is an outstanding book on this issue. It's called Poverty by America by Matthew Desmond. So it's not, it's a very interesting title, right? It's not Poverty in America, but Poverty by America. And it is the thesis of Matthew Desmond that poverty in America is a deliberate, intentional reality that is caused by policymakers, and we have to address those policies and really uh, come out with a much better way of handling this issue of poverty. Desmond describes poverty as a tight knot of social maladies. It is not just one reality, but it is many different social realities all tied together in this very, very tight knot. And so, in order to undo the knot, we have to look at all of the elements that are involved. It's like any knot that you try to undo. It's a challenge to undo that knot. Uh, it's hard. You have to try many ins and outs to get the knot out. And so poverty is like that. There are many different intersecting realities that we have to deal with in order to untie that knot of poverty. Interesting that one of Pope Francis's favorite devotions is Mary, Untier of Knots. And certainly the Pope has written a lot about poverty and our obligation as Christians, as Catholics, as people of goodwill to tackle this problem and to do something about it. What is poverty? Desmond describes it very interestingly. It's not being able to afford to go to a doctor. Most of us, we're sick. Let's get to the doctor. Let's get some medication. Let's see what can be done to alleviate the illness. That would be the natural way to deal with it. For someone who is poor, they can't afford that. That's not on their horizon. How can they go to a doctor? They don't have insurance, and they don't have money, and so the sickness can get much worse. Telling your kids that all you have to eat tonight is wish sandwiches for dinner. So use your imagination and pretend that you're eating a sandwich. That will be your dinner for tonight. You can't afford any food tonight. Poverty is facing eviction, not knowing where you're going to be sleeping. Uh, that's poverty. Poverty is depression. It's a deep depression because you don't have the resources that you need to provide for your family. Poverty is being exposed to unsafe and unhealthy housing. Poverty is being exposed to violence. This is poverty. And this is poverty in our country. This is the reality that our country people face. This is poverty. Interesting, Desmond says there has been increased spending on poverty, trying to eliminate it. But poverty has not changed over that time. At least 60 years we have been addressing poverty, but it has not changed. It's remained basically statistically the same. Well, what has proven to be effective? Two things stand out in Desmond's take on it. The first is the earned income tax credit for low-income workers, which raised so many children and families out of poverty, but it was unfortunately just for a short duration. And then housing assistance to get people into good housing, affordable housing for them. So these are two elements that we know can work, have worked. And so the question we ask is, why are we not expanding these efforts? Why are we not taking this path? We know what works. It's not a mystery. We know what will help families. Why aren't we willing to do it? Why don't we have the political will to do it? And we'll address that, and Desmond addresses that. Three things are needed, according to Desmond in his analysis of poverty by America. First of all, to deepen our investment in anti-poverty. For example, if the top 1% just paid the taxes they owe, not additional taxes, the taxes they owe in the current system, without loopholes. Of course, the reality is loopholes, loopholes, loopholes. And so the top 1% of earners are not paying those taxes. If that was fixed, loopholes eliminated, just pay at that rate. Of course, some would say the rate is too small to begin with. Then $175 billion a year additionally could be raised. $175 billion, enough to lift most Americans out of poverty. So that's one step, one obvious step that could be taken. But again, is there political will to do that? To eliminate those loopholes so that the 1% are actually paying the taxes they should be paying? Second, Desmond says we need to address exploitation in the labor market, the housing market, the financial industry, with overdraft fees and payday loan fees. Those fees alone, the overdraft fees and the payday loan fees, cost $61 million each and every day. You see a statistic like that and you're like, what? How could that be? $61 million. It seems kind of crazy, but those are simply the fees from the financial industry. Overdraft fees, payday loan fees. So again, we can see the issues that have to be addressed. And finally, we have to end segregation by changing zoning laws that oppose affordable housing. In many areas of the country, that is the big stumbling block to affordable housing, the zoning laws. People say, well, we don't want affordable housing. It's too dense. We want just single family. So we'll enact very harsh zoning laws to keep that out of our neighborhoods. We don't want it near us because it's going to bring in crime and it's going to make our neighborhood unsafe. It's going to lower our property values. And so those zoning laws oppose affordable housing. And what we get is de facto segregation. Laws not really relevant to segregation. People have open housing laws, fair housing laws, but as a matter of fact, because of affordability, segregation rules in many areas of our country. What about overdraft fees? Overdraft fees account for $11 billion per year. 80% of those overdraft fees are charged to just 9% of bank customers. So the vast majority, just to those bank customers, and those bank customers are primarily poor people. For example, you can overdraw your account by $20 and wind up paying $100 or $150 in overdraft fees. So those overdraft fees certainly account for a lot of money for the financial industry, but they impact greatly on poor people. Cities also today balance their budgets by ticketing and reticketing for poor families for minor violations. Inmates in many localities are charged for their time in jail. They have to pay their prosecution costs. Many times these are for misdemeanors or minor infractions, and interest is charged on these. So how can people get out of that situation? They have a jail record, they can't get a job. It's a vicious cycle for them. There's, of course, a myth in our country with regard to immigration. The myth is that immigration depresses wages and takes jobs from native workers. So we have to limit immigration because they're taking jobs away from our people who want to work, who have been here for many years, some for centuries. Right? Well, that myth, of course, has no reality in fact because poverty has stayed the same over the past 60 years. So with a great increase in immigration over those 60 years, you would think poverty would be out of control, but it has basically stayed the same. 3 states hold about half of our immigrant population. The 3 states are California, Florida, and Texas. In Texas and Florida, poverty has actually decreased over the last several decades. California, it has stayed roughly the same. Have immigrants contributed to wage stagnation? Older immigrants are competing with newer immigrants and not with native-born workers. So there is no wage stagnation due to immigration. It is due certainly to other factors, which we will get into. Do immigrants place undue pressure on the welfare state? The average immigrant family actually pays more in federal taxes than they receive in federal benefits. The welfare state benefits those who have plenty already. The welfare state really is stacked in favor of those who are the richer part of our population, wealthier part of our population, because they can write the laws, provide the loopholes to avoid paying the taxes. And so they are the ones really who benefit mostly from the welfare state. Another problem is decrease in union members since the 1970s. 1970s, there was certainly much more equitable wages. There wasn't a huge gap between those at the top and those at the bottom. And union membership has declined. One of the solutions that Desmond talks about is what we call sectoral bargaining. Sectoral bargaining would be like bargaining for all nurses, bargaining for all policemen, bargaining for all teachers. It would be a nationwide union type event, bargaining for all healthcare workers, nurses. It is done in Europe. 50% of the workers in a sector would have to vote yes in order to establish the union, and certainly it would lead to a great increase in unions and therefore help the average worker. What we see in America is what we call private opulence versus public squalor. Wealthy people withdraw from public spaces. They go into their own communities, have their own private country clubs, they have their own reality that they live in. Whereas in the public spaces, there is a lack of investment. They become run down. And what happens is people that are poor wind up using services that no one likes. Poverty drags everyone down because obviously when you're not investing in your public spaces, your country is going to look very different. And so you just have those private spaces that are fine and wonderful, but the public spaces uh, are deteriorating. Desmond speaks of the scarcity diversion. We say we can't afford to give health care to everyone, but we could if the richest among us took less from the federal government. We could afford to do more, but we have chosen by our public policies not to do so. We have made a deliberate choice not to do more, not to provide more adequate health care, more adequate housing, better education, better public spaces. That has been our choice that we have made. What can an individual do to reduce poverty? So this is where we come down to the basic question that all of us face. What can I do as an individual person? It seems like so overwhelming. It's this terrible knot. Public policy obviously is not going here in the right direction. If anything, in many quarters, it's going in the opposite direction of giving even less support to those that are poor. Desmond speaks about 5 steps individuals can take to reduce poverty. The first is use your influence where you are, such as how much landscapers are paid. If you're involved in a college, how much the adjunct faculty makes, how much do the cafeteria workers make. Use your influence where you are to advocate for better wages and better living conditions for people. Secondly, shop with your wallets by supporting companies that work with unions and also doing the same in our investment decisions. So we have the power of our purchases. Do not support those companies. Do not support unions and do not give living wage to workers. Take your business elsewhere to companies that do support workers and do support unions and do help workers. Thirdly, talking about income taxes differently. For example, should I be entitled to a home interest tax deduction when so many people are being evicted from their homes and apartments? So I'm fairly comfortable. I'm paying less. But yet my neighbors who are poor are getting evicted from their homes, getting evicted from their apartments. Something is wrong with this picture. Shouldn't we change our policies so that people can get the support that they need, the help that they need? And that those of us who are privileged with various deductions in the tax code do not take that money away from those who need it more. So the money is there. It's just a question of the proper use of those resources. And again, who is going to advocate for that? No one is going to come and say, well, I want to pay more taxes. But the reality is, if we're going to help our sisters and brothers get out of poverty, we have to look at our tax system. And we have to look what is fair and equitable for all, not just our own self-interest. The fourth thing that Desmond suggests is to attend zoning board meetings and to advocate for more affordable housing at those zoning board meetings. And this is very difficult because people want to protect their way of life and they don't want the affordable housing in their area. But if we are serious about ending poverty, certainly that is a big concern for all. And finally, to join an anti-poverty organization yourself, such as the Poor People's Campaign, End Poverty USA, various other organizations in your area that are working to end poverty. So we would say in conclusion, in reflecting on these suggestions that Matthew Desmond makes in his book Poverty by America, he's calling for us to look at our system in America, to challenge that system, and to say, are we serious about ending poverty in America? we truly want to do that. We seem to have the financial means and resources to do that, to lift other people up who are poor. But it would involve changes. Are we willing to undertake those changes and be serious about ending poverty in America?